first episode of the Lifesprings International podcast. Lifesprings is a global network of women whose mission is to connect, encourage, and prepare women worldwide to impact their communities with the love of Jesus. I'm your host, Britt Santos, and I'll be joined by many of the incredible women who make up Lifesprings. I'm so excited to share their stories of what God has done and is doing through their lives and ministries. And in doing so, we hope to become part of your faith story. We believe faith formation and carrying out the work of being Jesus' hands and feet should be done in community. While women are natural community builders, we have unique challenges and obstacles that can impact our ability to follow God's call in our lives. So whether you are part of a supportive faith community, looking for encouragement and resources, or maybe you're even a new believer in Jesus, we're so glad you're here and we're ready to connect. So on this, our first ever episode, I have Christa Eisbrenner with me. You are my part-time co-host. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Okay. I would love if you were here every week, every month, depending on our schedule, but you are a busy lady. You are the director of Lifesprings Canada.
Yeah.
You want to take it away and introduce what other things you're doing and even like your family.
Sure. So I am a recently ordained priest in the Anglican Church of Canada.
Very recently, yeah.
Yes. I pastor 2 churches in rural Alberta. And what else do I want to say? I have
How many kids do you have, Christa?
Well, it has been
so many daughters.
Joy in life to gather girls. And so I have 3 adult stepdaughters who are rocking adulthood. They are doing awesome. And 3 little adopted girls. And we have this wonderful, big, messy family. We are very close with the bio family, and we do life together. We celebrate each other and are very blessed by this crazy life that we're in.
I feel like gathering girls needs to be on your t-shirt.
Yes.
Because that's kind of even what you do within Lifesprings and what you did with the School of Women in Ministry. One of your many talents, along with axe throwing and cheese pairing.
Yes, those are some of my favorite things in life.
Yes, is networking women. And some of my now best friends are people that you've introduced me to. So that's quite a skill. So good. Within your role at Lifesprings Canada,
yes,
can you tell us about what you do as part of our Canadian team? But actually, maybe even let's back it up and say, for those who aren't super familiar with what Lifesprings is and does, what is Lifesprings International?
Lifesprings International started in, I believe it was 2006 in France. There was a woman who had a ministry mostly in French, but her native language was English, and really just had a desire to have something for herself in her heart language. And so she gathered some women, they were doing some breakfast together, and one thing led to another. There was a retreat for English-speaking women in Europe, in Western Europe, and it has grown to this international ministry. And we have people in the UK, in France, in Switzerland, in Romania, in Uganda, in Mongolia, and of course in North America and in Canada. And there's many different things that we do. One of them is a school of women in ministry, and we take women through spiritual formation and biblical knowledge and ministry competence. And it's an amazing course. We've run this in Canada multiple times. We also have a PAC training, which is Peace Amid Conflict training. And so we've taken this to different places. We know from scripture that conflict happens. It is a part of life. So as believers, how do we do conflict well? How do we do conflict in a God-honoring way that draws us deeper into our faith instead of creating divisions?
Yeah, and the way that, I guess, Lifesprings feels, the way that we should respond even to conflict is kind of a part of our DNA, which we'll talk about. That's part of our prayers of preparation. But one of the things I love so much about that is, as we're talking about how do we equip women to do ministry, is that like one of even the first steps is be ready for conflict. Like, as opposed to, I've ran into conflict. And now we have to have like a reaction to say, like, this is, we're human beings. This is going to be part of being on a team. It's going to be part of your ministry. And so just even to like prepare women to say, let's talk about how we do this well, and even how we, I guess, concentrate it to say, like, actually you can build relationships out of this. Yeah. One of the many, many things I love about Lifesprings. So when we talk about Canada, which, as we've said, there's schools and there's teams in other countries. Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I will share this space with other people, because we have other amazing women in Lifesprings who are going to come join me in this conversation. Definitely will help keep things lively, because everyone who's listening is going to love each and every one of these women. But back to you for the Canadian team. Tell us about what you're doing, what we're doing here in Canada, because that's one of the cool things, is that each country has the ability to kind of contextualize it to its culture. But what are we doing here in Canada? What does that role look like for you?
So we are in the midst of a shift, I would say, in Canada, in the Christian subculture in Canada, and a physical school to gather women in a physical location isn't the priority that it used to be. So as we have talked and prayed about how we can continue to develop spiritual formation, continue good prayer practices, teach women how to minister well in their communities, we have decided we need to continue to get this information out there. If it's not in the format of a school, maybe we should do it in a podcast. So here we are, Brittany, excited that you have taken on this task and agreed to be our lead host. I am thrilled to do this alongside with you.
I'm so excited.
I know, because I just like hanging out with you, Brittany.
We just like to talk. This is perfect. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that is, it's obviously, podcasts are helpful and amazing, and it's an area that's growing in media. But when we talk about the mission of Lifesprings and being a means of encouraging and preparing and equipping women, we have to ask the question, so why do, amidst all the amazing spiritual formation resources out there right now, why do we need something just for women? I would love to hear your thoughts on that more, but that's kind of one of the whys behind the podcast. Is, I know for me, I have 3 kids and lots of stuff going on with ministry and the organizations I'm part of. And sometimes, like, that extra hour that you have to drive, being able to listen to a podcast is so helpful. And so it's just part of that vision of, how do we see women where they are in their lives and the incredible things that God's asking them to do, and how do we come alongside them? And if we can come alongside you in your car, or while you are doing something at work and you want to pop your headphones in, that's really cool. And we get to talk so much about that. For now, I would love to hear more of your thoughts, and I certainly have a lot of thoughts. Again, back to this why of, why do we need a spiritual formation and ministry equipping space for women, as opposed to, for example, I love John Mark Comer's work, Everything with Practicing the Way. So many books like Celebration of Discipline and the work of Dallas Willard is very influential on me. Yeah, those are obviously male authors, and sometimes more, depending on them, like a male context. Do you have any thoughts on that, of just answering the why behind why do we want to do this by women for women?
Right. So as you've said, there are amazing resources out there for everyone.
And don't not read those.
Right, exactly.
Fantastic.
Don't not read those.
Part of how I was educated.
I think many of us have experienced situations where we realize there are limitations in our roles of wives and mothers and working women, or combinations, not combinations of any of those, that realize we needed something contextual for us. And we are unapologetically seeking out female thought leaders, female theologians, female ministers who know the untold struggles of our lives, and are doing things from a certain perspective. And we want to celebrate those voices. We want to hear from them and learn from them. And so that is really part of the reason why we are having something by women for women. Now, Brittany, just knowing you, I know that you can give some really good examples of why we need to have things by women for women.
Yeah, I mean, I have just what I've seen in my own life, and just back to who we are as Lifesprings, is the belief that pursuing spiritual formation and going on mission needs to be done in community.
Yes.
And one thing I know about women, we're natural community builders.
Yes.
So that's not typically an obstacle for us, but there are unique obstacles and challenges that affect women. One of them for me, just as, for example, a Bible college student taking spiritual formation, spiritual discipline classes, I was a mom of a very little baby who was still dependent on me for, I was still breastfeeding when I was in college, which I did it. I look back now, I'm like, I can't believe I did that. I was so sleep deprived. But at the time, I was like, this is what I'm doing. And so I can just remember one of the courses I was taking and reading the books like Celebration of Discipline, which again, I love Richard Foster. It's an incredible book. I still use a lot of his resources. But the materials that they were drawing for the course as far as assignments were kind of based on these things and based on what I assume the life experiences of our instructor, who was a man. And so one of our biggest assignments of the course might have been worth as much as 40%, was you're going to do a day, an overnight of fasting and prayer and solitude and meditation. And so I emailed him. Of course, I'm the type of person who goes through the syllabus early on with a fine-tooth comb because I like my grades and I like to get all my points. So I'm breaking down this assignment and all these things I have to do. And I have a 5-month-old baby, and just emailed him and said, I can't fast. I'm breastfeeding and I can't be. Boy, would I love solitude. Boy, would I love silence. That's not a part of my life right now. I also had a 2.5-year-old, was kind of already thinking through ways that I could maybe I could gather with other moms. Maybe there's some ways. And he was just kind of like, this is the assignment. He wasn't unapologetic about it, but was kind of like, everybody else is doing this. This has been the assignment in this course for years. So unfortunately, whatever parts you can't do, we just can't give you credit for that, which I know a lot of people could say as long as you pass. But I am the type of person who really likes my gold star, and it hurts me to not get a good grade. But I chose to address it after the course was over, so it didn't seem like I was just trying to get a better grade. Yeah, so I didn't do it, and I approached the director of the college afterwards and just kind of shared my experience of how that made me feel as a woman. Again, not just to get the bad grade. I think it was more as a Bible college student. This was 7 years ago now, so younger, how much it would have meant to me for them to say, of course you can still pursue spiritual formation. Of course you can still celebrate the disciplines. You're going to have to do it in a different way. And how much more incredible would it have been if he had said, Brittany, to be honest, I've never had a baby. I've never thought about what it would be like to practice and understand and even think through theologically fasting when I'm in that, a mother and breastfeeding and up all night. So tell me how you would re-envision this assignment, or give me that feedback, because it would have been amazing to have some examples of other ways to do it. And in that, I think I would have heard, yes, even you, young mom, even you with a baby on your hip, even you are being called to deeper contemplative work towards Christ. Even you are called to disciplines, but it's going to have to look a different way. So when we had this conversation with the director, I will say they were apologetic, and he had kind of said, this came up last year with a student who was diabetic, and we should have addressed the course then. Sorry that we didn't, and we're going to address it going forward. So it was good. And I will even say that as far as being at that Bible college, when I had a baby and I was like, how am I going to keep up with studies? One of my instructors was just like, bring the baby to class. I would have my baby in the car seat in the office while he's filling me in on notes. One time there was a lecture, and he said, I'll just Zoom you in. I don't want you to miss this lecture, because it was a guest. And my 2-year-old started screaming, and I forgot to put myself on Zoom. And this lecturer could hear me, and I just thought, oh my gosh, they're going to be like, we're never doing this again. And this guest lecturer, who was a woman, says to the class, and let this be a note to all of you students, that if you can't preach while a baby is screaming, then you might need more practice, get used to it. So I just want to say, I didn't feel my college was unsupportive, or that they didn't see me as a mom and say, how can we invite you into this? I think what their limit is they had not thought through what does this mean to do these things as a woman? What would this look like through the perspective of a mother? Or even, that's my worldview, so I don't want to limit. What would this look like as a perspective of a single missionary? As a woman who's hearing, a lot of examples of what it looks like to be pursuing Christ, but all the examples are of a wife and mother. And I just think they didn't have a lot of books and authors and resources that were written by women. And so I don't think it was intentional, but I think we do need to be intentional about building our libraries and inviting voices in who have, that different perspective. And for us, it's other women.
And we have such an amazing group of resources within Lifesprings around the globe who we will invite in as guests to our podcast. And both of us are really excited for you all to hear from this very diverse group of women who are going to share real life experiences of what it has been like to pursue God in their context.
This is the first time, being our first episode, that I've thought through language, but like, could I go so far as say is like, they're badass? So like,
yes,
like there might be at least more than one person who's potentially even been shot at in that group. Like,
oh, for sure.
These are women who are, their stories, like, they're in it. I think it's even one really cool thing is we didn't want to limit this space to people who are in church ministry as far as like your institutional Sunday mornings, but to really have a variety of voices who, some of these ladies, they're grandmas, but they're also like doing this incredible, like even dangerous mission work. And they're just some of the coolest people we know, which kind of, I want to go back to that piece about the specific obstacles and challenges for women who are just trying to do what they think God is telling them to do, whether that's ministry, whether that's mission, whether that's, I think I'm supposed to bring a casserole to my neighbor who's Muslim or a different culture or religion than me. What do you think are some of those other challenges? And I am intentionally asking you this as someone who was a single missionary for years. Again, I'm like very aware that a lot of my examples are how pursuing biblical literacy impacted me as someone who was a mother of young children. But yeah, there are other obstacles that women face, and we have women on our team who weren't or aren't mothers, who are still, like, it's more than just the motherhood and the whether you're going to have dinner ready. That kind of impacts how we can go after some of these things, whatever it is that God's calling us to do.
Singleness can be an uncomfortable space for others.
Yeah.
So when marriage and family is the norm, people don't know how to welcome in single people. This could be as simple as inviting a single person to sit with you in church, inviting a single person over for lunch when you think we should be inviting a family. Will this be awkward if it's my kids running around, me and my husband, and we invited a single? It feels outside of the bounds of some people's comfort to allow single people in. And so as someone that was single until my late 30s, navigating spaces with men and with women on how to pursue my faith, how to lean into who God had created me to be in that season of growth and love for those around me. And it takes intentional thought and effort for what that looks like for you. And we want to highlight those voices as well.
Yeah, absolutely. My single season, that's so Christianese to say, my season of singleness. My season of singleness was like, I got married pretty young. It wasn't even the plan, but I found a great guy and I locked it down. But even in that short time between when I came to Christ as an 18-year-old to when Brian and I started dating at 21, in that short time, everything I was invited to in the church was like a singles mixer. So here I was, a brand new Christian. And I will say, like, just part of my story is when I got baptized, it was because I really heard that this is a way that you can be obedient to Jesus. And I heard that there's a God who loves you, who died for you, and he's asking you to confess that and just trust him. And so I got into that water with full trust and full hope. but not fully understanding what even the Bible is or what it says. Like, I read John because my pastor said, go read John. And I was like, yes, not too much more than that. So I'm a brand new Christian. I wasn't raised going to church. And I'm showing up with my Bible and I'm so hungry for anything I can learn about what is God's character. And I have this book, like, how do we read all this? And like, what are we? And people would be like, oh, well, we have a college and career group and, it's a lot of young singles. And, there's some cute boys in that group. And it was just like the perspective of those in the church was like, maybe they felt like what she needs is to meet a great guy. And that was kind of discouraging to me because then I would sometimes go to these groups and maybe this is just my perspective, but I felt the people that were there were like, I want to meet a girlfriend or a boyfriend. So I'm like, hey, like, what's up with numbers? Like, what's up with like all of this talk of circumcisions? And they're like, yeah, but are you single? So I was like, I don't think we're here to do a lot of Bible chat. And certainly that is not the experience of every young adult group.
Right.
But I just think that's one of those things about obstacles that women face is even maybe what your church thinks about what you should be doing at your particular stage of life. And it's something that a dear friend had said to me about when she kind of stopped attending church is she every single Sunday she said someone would ask like, so are you seeing anyone? Or they would say, don't worry, you're going to meet someone great. And she just felt like this doesn't feel good for me to show up here anymore. And I certainly men would experience that too, but it's just a little bit probably the way that they get that message is probably different.
And so I became a part of Lifesprings when I was still very much in my single season of being single.
Season of singleness.
Oh, that's so Christian.
It's so Christian. We have to come up with or maybe we learn and lean into the cringe of that term. But
I felt accepted as a whole person within Lifesprings. I didn't feel like I was intruding in space that I shouldn't be in, but I was the token single person or anything. That has never been who Lifesprings is. And I just want to shout the praises for a group of women that welcomes women from any stage of life and says, you have a place here. If you are a newer Christian, I don't know where I am right now Christian, I've been doing this for decades and I am that grandma and looking for my next kingdom assignment. We all have a place in this worldwide community of people that want to show the love of God to our communities.
It's one of my favorite things about them. I immediately felt it the first time, even speaking to some of the women at Lifesprings. And then when I got to attend a gathering in person, wasn't just do I feel welcomed here, but it was the absence of feeling like I needed to assimilate or be anything other than what I was. I felt like people pretty quickly were calling out things that were different about me, like in a good way. Like, hey, you're younger than me. I bet you could speak to this. Or hey, you're different in this way. I bet that means that you could really, bring this to the table. Yeah, I think that's so important because that's a huge part of my belief as far as community is that we don't just accommodate and make places for people to be there, but that we say our community is made better because you're here. And that is one of the incredible things about Lifesprings. And it, I think, is one of the things that's most powerful about being an international organization is when we got together most recently in the Netherlands with this group, you pretty quickly, I guess, do hear things that you say where you're like, that might just be a North American thing. And I did not realize that when we talk about the desire, for example, for women to have online courses, that might be something that's either more unique to North America or there's just way more demand for it. And so then when you have voices from women from Mongolia and Uganda, you're like, oh, right. There's there's so many other contexts and there's so many other needs. And even the way that has, I guess, equipped me to minister to women who come from other cultures into Canada.
Right.
Because I'm like, oh, okay, I did learn a little bit about this. So we've already said this. We're going to invite some of the other directors from other countries and teams to come speak. But just quickly thinking about the other teams and representing the other countries and cultures, can you think of any things that I guess are unique to the other women in Lifesprings that they might be going through just by the fact that they're in France or they're in Mongolia. Like, what are some other things happening worldwide that are outside of things we only think about as North Americans as far as impacting women's ability to impact people with the gospel?
So there was just this past month a Lifesprings Women's Weekend Retreat in Uganda. The women,
The videos are
there,
so good.
They are so good. Such joy, such joy. But there are some very real economic, societal pressures on women in Uganda that we do not understand to the same degree in North America. And these women are hungry for in-person fellowship. Online presence is difficult in Uganda. And so they had a couple hundred women gather because they needed that presence of the Spirit with each other. They needed to come together and encourage each other and hear from women together. And they talked a lot about family and what that looks like to love your spouse, love your children, and had a wonderful time. So that's Uganda. In France, a lot of their dealings as a team is doing things in two languages, realizing that they have this strong expat community that is stronger in English, and they have this strong French community that is much stronger in French, and being so intentional about bringing them together into one community. And so making sure that there is strong presence and translation into both languages, that they have things that are coming from English, things that are coming from French, and everyone is welcome here as a full partner. And so they are planning their retreat for the spring of 2025 here, and I'm excited.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, to see what they're going to do.
I think you could tell too that has impacted how they engage with other people. I noticed that so many of the women that I met spoke more slowly and maybe, even use more like hand gestures, which is wonderful. And now I'm just thinking like it was probably intentional, because one of the women who was there, she had to have a translator with her. She didn't. What language? Help me out.
Mongolian.
Mongolian. Okay, that seems obvious. The woman from Mongolia spoke Mongolian. So she didn't understand people, and she had a translator. And at the end of the weekend, I just kind of said hi to her. And her translator on behalf of her said, "You speak very fast." And I was like, right. I'm not in the habit of talking to someone who is like translating, or even English isn't their first language. And so they're taking that extra step. So it's just really cool to see like even the ways that this has impacted how some of these women just like talk to each other. So that's really cool. It has been amazing hearing all their stories. Even as we're talking about each country and each cultural context has unique challenges, what's also cool is that we can get in a room with women from all over the world who have experienced very different lives than each other and than us. And yet there is a lot of commonality.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of when we do things like even communion together and pray together, is here's this person who, she doesn't speak your language, and you can't even really talk to each other, or they're just, culturally maybe would do things like meal times different. And then you come together and you pray and you do some of these things that have become a part of Lifesprings DNA. And you realize, we already know, but you see how cross-cultural the gospel is.
Right.
Like Jesus really is for everybody at every time, at every age.
And
you're
every
like,
culture.
Right, we are actually so similar in a lot of ways because we've been knit together. I remember this one woman, she was trying to buy a ticket for a bus, or I also was struggling with the bus system in Europe. She couldn't figure out like online e-commerce. And she's calling her son. This is one of the women from Uganda. And her son, I didn't understand what he was saying because of the language, but I understood the eye roll and the sigh, which was like, "Oh, mom," because she wasn't, she like didn't have her phone facing her. He's like, I'm assuming I can only see your thumb. Like, get your thumb off the camera. And I'm like, our younger sons being annoyed because we don't understand technology is so universal. That's hilarious to me. But also, yeah, our stories of encountering God, like there was so much commonality in it. And in that, having this network of women across the world, like it's so enriching. They do bring something else, but also you kind of have that connection of we really are just part of one body.
And as part of one body, we have access to the same Holy Spirit that indwells each one of us. And one of Lifesprings' prayer practices is a prayer of examen. And if you are unfamiliar with a prayer of examen, it is a time of listening to God, listening to the Holy Spirit. It is not a time for us to talk, but to examine what we have just gone through in a meeting, what we have experienced in our day, or maybe it's a year-end examen and experiencing what we have been through in the past year. And when we come into meetings and we discuss things with each other across cultures, across languages, and say, okay, and now let's take time to hear from the Holy Spirit. And we sit in silence and let the Holy Spirit talk to us. And it is such an enriching time of prayer.
It is. Even the posture of allowing God to have the last word, I think, is formational.
Yes.
Yeah. So, quick shout out to that, just because I'm thinking about it. We practice and examine just within the way that we structure our meetings with each other. Certainly, if there's a decision to make, we, kind of end it with like, let's just pause and do some reflection. We practice examen like in the Ignatian style or tradition as a group where we'll go through examens. But Lifesprings also offers this not as a course. Is it a course? Help me out here.
It's kind of a mini course.
Anyone, it doesn't, you have to be part of it. You can just enroll and they will take you through, like the year-end exam is one they do, right? That they offer. Yeah. What does that look like?
So that is coming up in a couple of weeks here, or maybe by the time this is broadcast, it will have already happened. And so it'll be available online, and I'm sure we can put something in the show notes to a link to it. But it will have a couple of pages available to you to kind of direct you through questions of what was this past year like, and walk you through just ways to think through that and to think through where was God in the midst of those questions and desires and disappointments and the whole gamut of what a whole calendar year brings. And this is a practice we've been doing as an organization for a number of years now. And to be able to reflect yearly on where has God been this past year for me as an individual, for us as an organization, in any other area that I need to process that with, has been such a gift.
Yeah. As a spiritual director, it's something that I practice with directees often. It's also something that once we practice more as Lifesprings, I brought into just our family life. We've talked about this, how our kids come home and you're like, how was your day? And they're like, the worst. It was the worst day. And you're like, okay, did a bad thing happen or was it a bad day? So especially when they come home and they're grouchy, like we will practice the examen at the end of the day. Say, okay, it was a bad day. Tell me, like, where was God in that? So your friend pushed you. Where was Jesus in that? Like, where did you see God in your day? And it has a pretty remarkable way of helping them, even my youngest at 6, reframe. Even he will kind of be like, maybe actually God was asking me to understand that that kid was really frustrated because this other thing happened. How cool that something like that can even start forming little people. Certainly the way that we practice it isn't how I practice it with my kids. It's a simplified version, but I would say for anyone interested in learning about that, it is something that you can apply to any community or by yourself. We are recording this in December. Mm-hmm. By the time people hear it, it will be in January.
Yeah.
So I love that we're talking about this because, and I think this is something that, one of the women at Lifesprings kind of told me when she was talking about the year-end examen is how countercultural that is, because often January it's New Year's resolutions, right? You're looking ahead. You're looking at what am I going to do? What are my goals? And kind of even in the goal setting process might be something like, for example, losing weight. or doing something that maybe you thought you failed at in the previous year, or this idea that like things need to be better. And so instead of setting resolutions, you're working backwards and saying, where was God this year? Like, where did he show up? I want to pay attention to his movements. I want to look at the ways that I did grow this year. I want to look at the hard things that happened and remember how hard they are, but also how did they form me? Or, how did that connect me to my community? In that feels like such a more productive practice than me making a list of New Year's resolutions that I'm probably not going to fulfill. Mm-hmm. That's me. I'm not great at those things, but yeah, I would encourage people whenever you're hearing this to look into that, because especially for this time of year, I think, again, the process of looking back and saying, where was God, and even in what ways am I being drawn into community, is probably more productive than I should really drink all my water each day. You should drink your water. Stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated. Hydrate, not dehydrate. Another practice.
I've had exclusively coffee today. I'm realizing that right now. That's so. I will drink water after this.
One cup of water, so I'm good. And now I can just drink that coffee. It's an IV. Anyways, another mini course that Lifesprings does is a rule of life. Yes. I think so. If you're unfamiliar with what a rule of life is, it is a way of structuring your life, paying attention to what God is up to in your life. And that's going to look different for every person. And so we have this year-end examen in December. And then typically in January, we offer this mini course for a rule of life. And so to be going over what are the things that are really important in this chapter? What do I need to be focusing on? What are
habits to build?
Habits to build. Yeah. What are some things that I need to let go? And being intentional with my time and my life and sitting with the Lord in that. So such a different feeling than setting New Year's resolutions.
Yes, it is.
This feels like things that are going to help me grow and build.
Yeah. I would say, as opposed to like just comparing the two, as opposed to a resolution being like, this is really something I should do. Mm-hmm. I think what's really helpful about developing a rule of life is acknowledging the impact that our habits do have.
Right.
Like that these things are forming me, and maybe how I tweak those or restructure it. If you have read any other spiritual formation resources, maybe something like Practicing the Way, or I think Ruth Haley Barton gets into it, talking about the rule of life, often people will use the picture of a trellis.
Yeah.
I can't garden. My understanding is it's like the thing that your vines cling to so that they don't just grow anywhere and everywhere. Gives them something to kind of hold on to as they go up. And that might be a helpful picture, because something happens inside me when someone says rule. Something already, I'm like, uh-oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's like the rebel in me or even the person in me that does like to do things really well and get a gold star and get 100%, that I'm like, if that's the rule, then I must. And I become very legalistic about it. That's not what a rule of life is. So you could use rhythm of life, or you could use, some of these other pictures, but it's the idea that we acknowledge that we're going to put habits in, or even commitments that are going to help kind of shape what we're doing in our formation. One of them for Lifesprings, for example, is we start our meetings with a check-in.
Yes.
And as a recovering efficiency champion, I'm like, if we talk to everybody about how their kids are doing and how their life is, we will lose 37.2 minutes. And then came to see like, oh, I get how this rule, this commitment to check in with each other before we get down to business. It's one of those things like, this is forming us. Because what we're doing is saying like, you matter and your life matters and your spiritual health matters. And I'm going to prioritize our relationship. Right? Am I getting that right?
Okay. We are not just a team that do ministry together.
Right.
We are human beings loved by God. We're walking together, journeying together through life. And we have to know and respect each other as human beings before we get work done. And so that check-in is really important. I mean, honestly, when we started doing this as Lifesprings, it drove me insane.
It was a hard thing for me to accept. Now that I'm there, I love it.
But
but at first, I'm like, we're wasting time.
Exactly. Can we just get down to the meeting? Now, going into a meeting somewhere else and just being like, okay, will someone pray? Let's start our meeting. I'm like, whoa,
no one even asked me about my dog's ear infection. So like, we're just going to get into it.
Like, there's things that are happening in my heart and my mind right now that are distracting me from this meeting until I can say that to the rest of you, so we all know what we are bringing into this time together.
And it's not a fix. Sometimes it's just like, can I just lay this down real quick so that everybody knows, okay, that's where I'm at.
Right.
We started, so today when we decided we were going to record, we did not start at that time because I was like, real quick, I need to tell you a life update. And then you shared me, that's how it goes. We often, but we knew that. When you were like, what time should I come over today? I'm like, we should have extra time because we both know that there will be time that we need to spend together. That's not just the job of, say, recording this podcast. So it's important. It took me a while to understand how important it is. But then when you are in the getting down to business and you have a hard decision to make, or even ministry is hard. I don't care what your mission is or what your kingdom assignment is. This is talking about obstacles that women face. One of them is believing and understanding that they're a missionary because they don't think that what they're doing is a mission because it's not, a registered charity or something like that. So you're ministering to someone and you're doing hard things, and you need to have people checking in, and you need to know and believe that people care about you in that. Yeah. So that's one of those things that's built into our rule of life. And again, it's not so much about, well, this is a hard, fast rule that we must follow because it's legalistic, but it's about saying, who do we want to become? Who are we becoming in this? And what do we want community to look like? I do want to circle back to something we said, maybe 20 minutes ago. We don't have time to fully talk about this, but as soon as you said it, I'm like, let's get into that. You had said one of the things about the Uganda team is that they're really not asking for an online platform to gather, to connect, to learn. One, not everybody has the same access to some of the platforms that we do. Culturally, maybe I hope for them that they're not Zooming as much as we're Zooming. That's my hope for them. And in our context, we're hearing, at least what people are saying is kind of the opposite. It's like, we probably would want to move away from gatherings and have more of your courses as online content, or maybe we could just do something when we meet online. And so one of the things that you hinted at is, this is what North Americans are asking for, but this isn't what maybe some of the women in Africa are looking for. But is that true? Is it true that we don't want to look people in the actual eyeball, and we don't want to gather in person, and that we just only want to chat in WhatsApp? Because I don't know. I guess I both, like, as someone who, as a mom, when I had children and I was going through Bible college and seminary, I just couldn't have completed that work if some of those courses weren't online. Like, technology and us connecting online, especially during COVID, made it possible for me to have access to theological education. But I don't feel like it is true, at least for me, that I don't want to gather with people in person. I want to get together in person.
I think there's a lot that plays into that. I'm going to say one of them is the last couple of years has grown deep distrust among people. I think people
just with like division
are more hesitant to enter a new community that they don't know yet.
Yeah.
And so just to invite people to say, hey, we're offering this. You're going to love it. Come here and join this.
Yeah, you don't know anyone, but show up. It's going to be great.
Is terrifying.
It is terrifying.
So the approach is not that we don't need in-person gatherings. I think it is more of a welcome here. Get to know us in your own time. Come and get to know Christa and Brittany on this podcast. Get to know some of the other Lifesprings people. You are welcome. And when you feel comfortable, come and meet us in person, because we're a pretty great crowd.
Yes. I'm glad you said that, because I forgot when we met at our last retreat, we had talked about we still want to have the gatherings, but maybe having an online book club is a way for people just like take a step in that doesn't feel as scary. You get to know people. Okay, now I'm ready to come meet in person. Or maybe you start by listening to a podcast. And then you're like, maybe I want to join a book club. And then maybe you want to come in person. Certainly not everybody who's listening to this is going to be in Edmonton, but you will hear us again and again and again say that part of what Lifesprings is and what makes us great is this belief that we do spiritual formation and we do ministry and mission in community. So wherever you are, we want you to have a community. And I guess I can also say, like, as someone who has people in my family who are autistic, that's why I want to be so careful how I talk about this. Removing online interactions or the ability for someone to connect with a church online or in a place that's maybe even is less sensory stimulating is so important, and it allows us to be inclusive to people with different needs. So we definitely don't want to remove that. But I just really, really want people to hear, like, have people that you're walking with, especially if God has called you to do something and serve something and you're like, whoa, are you serious, God? Not me. I can't. So when you have people who are walking with you, checking in and just like holding you up, that just makes it so much more doable. And we can say, give it to Jesus and God's going to help you. But I think one of the ways that God helps us is by saying, this is my body and it's full of different people.
Yes.
and they're awesome. Okay. It's almost time for us to wrap up, which is so hard because I would want to talk about the pros and cons of online engagement and setting up spaces where we can meet over Zooms and Facebooks versus getting together in church basements and people's homes. So we can save that for another time. But for now, as we go forward in our next couple of episodes, we want to continue to introduce people to what Lifesprings is, what we do, and how we do it, and what makes us different. That's a lot of so one of the things that you and I identified and what we identified with the Lifesprings community is we do have these prayers of preparation. These are prayers that we have built into every meeting and when we gather. And they're based off of, again, that idea of like doing things in community, but who we want to be in the way that we want to minister. That's right?
I think so.
So I'll tell you guys what those things are. And then we will, over the next couple months, take an episode for each one to talk about what does that actually mean, that prayer? Why do we do it? Why is it important to do it in community? So one of the first things is a prayer for indifference. We pray for that every time. For faithful stewardship, for wisdom. And then why don't you tell me the other three?
Peace bringing, humility, and quiet trust.
Yeah. I love that already some of those things seem very contemplative, maybe even like the words humility and quiet. But these are still things that we are practicing in community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we get to hear some stories of different women in our group who are on mission in their own in amazing, unique ways, and the reasons why it matters that we're praying every time to be peace bringers. Why does it matter that we're praying every time to have quiet trust or to be faithful stewards? So I'm excited, I guess, to talk more about that. And even as part of this conversation about women in community pursuing spiritual formation, why it matters that we kind of keep each other accountable to these things. We already talked a little bit about that peace bringing. Yes. So that would be an example is we're saying even before we start the thing and the project that we're like, let's make sure that we've prepared to engage conflict well. So here's my idea for how to end this. This might be something that I just personally think is very cool, but I would love every person who comes on and chats with me. And if it's you, you're just going to have to read more books. Because my question is, as we wrap these up, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? So as we mentioned at the beginning, I am new to a role as a priest in the Anglican Church. As I have come into my new office in the parish that I'm in, just looking through the bookshelves and the books that were left behind.
They're so good. I almost took some books. I remember I was like, are these for anybody? Yeah, that was a good collection.
One of them I look at and I realized, oh, this author is one of the women in our church.
That's so cool.
She is, and so she doesn't know this yet, she's a blind woman, and she wrote a book called Excited, and sighted being in the like looking, seeing sight, excited. And the things that you go through when you lose your sight and what that has been for her. And she researched and she interviewed people, and just bringing this together as a resource for other people that are going through vision loss and what that's going to mean. So I saw it, and for me to get to know someone who is introverted and doesn't say as much, but a thoughtful and very intelligent and caring person, as she has written this book as a resource for others. So I am reading Excited by Sue Bowman.
I didn't know that. That's great. A little something about me is I'm involved in research and conversations around disability theology and the experience of people in our church with disabilities. And again, very much back to that idea of like, how do we not just like accommodate, as in we've made it possible for you to be here, but say our community and even our understanding of who God is made richer by your testimony and by your experience. And so with this group that I'm working with, we have been collecting books of people who have varying disabilities. I don't think we have anyone who has any type of vision impairment on our author list. So,
but very dear person.
So cool.
So and getting a little bit more insight into her life as she has experienced vision loss over the last 20 years.
Awesome. For spiritual formation resources, we talked a little bit at the beginning about there's a lot of incredible books written by men. Don't not read those books. That's not what I'm saying. Read those books. But if someone was wanting to expand their library, whether you're a man or a woman, to maybe some theologians who are female, just in the world of liturgy, spiritual formation, do you have some recommendations that you love?
Spiritual formation is going to be Ruth Haley Barton.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just got to be at the top of the list because she has spent a lot of time working through what this is. There's going to be more, but that's
Sacred Rhythms. That's the one specifically for disciplines, right?
Yeah.
It's so good. Particularly, there's a part, and she explores it in another book. I don't remember the title, but I can post it.
Pursuing God's Will Together is so a lot of what has influenced Lifesprings on how we have decided to come together.
Yeah.
When we gather, how we pray together, how we check in with each other.
Yeah. And she has one on retreats, which was for me really, really influential. And it's part of how I practice solitude and prayer retreats. There's another one that it came to my mind even as I was saying it, as far as pursuing God and liturgy through the perspective of a woman. I want to say Liturgy of the Ordinary. It's a green book with toast on it.
Harrison Warren.
Okay, good. I'm like, you'll know the author.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
That'd be another one, I would say.
Absolutely.
Well, there's 3 books that people can check out. Okay, we are going to wrap up. Before we do that, I have a list of, for me, at least 2 people that we need to thank today. I would like to think that I'm somewhat technologically savvy, even serving with School of Women in Ministry as your communication director. Felt like I had what I needed to start a podcast. I'm like, I'll figure it out. It's a little bit more involved than just, like,
how about that?
Opening your computer.
Yeah.
Right. So my good friend, Aaron Parker, I would say like he was a consultant for this. There was a time where I got very overwhelmed about auxiliary cables and whether we were doing this through USB or whether we were doing this through an audio interface. And I just started sending him 1,000 Amazon links. Like, do I buy this? Do I go through this? He spent a lot of time with me, coaching me, not just on how we were going to do this, but how do we do this? Here was my question for him. I'm like, Aaron, sometimes it's going to be me and Christa in my house. Sometimes I want to interview a woman in Romania. And I need to know that we're going to be able to do that. And we're going to be able to get video when we need it and audio when we need it. And how do I set this up so that we can meet in different time zones with different microphones? So he worked very hard to just think through all of those logistics. Aaron Parker is an audio technician and he's also a graphic designer. You guys can find his portfolio online. I also would want to thank my good friend, Kent Neufeld. He wrote a piece of music for us. Specifically composed the music for our intro and some of our transitions. He's a musician, again, based in Edmonton. He does a lot of different music, but what I think Kent does best is he actually composes children's music, like funk, jazz type things. It's so cool. And all of these guys donated their time really generously to this project. And yeah, we just really appreciate that. So I will post wherever you are finding those websites so that you can support them if you can. We're so thankful to our whole board who has supported us and championed us, our families too. Thank you to my dog for not barking for an hour. That was really champion work. Okay, thank you guys, and we're excited for our next episode, which will be coming out at the end of the month. After you hear this one, please do get a hold of us. When we say we do this in community, we mean it, and we want to invite people to know us and engage with us. So you'll have different ways that you can contact us, but obviously the Lifesprings International website, there's a way you can contact us through that. If you want to get involved, there's so many different ways. Like we said, there's courses that you can take, things that you can enroll in just as kind of a one-off. And then of course you can join Lifesprings, be part of the mission. So we'll continue to inform you guys about that. But for today, thank you for being part of this, our first episode, and we hope that something here was helpful.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.